Hello, I'm Jothy Rosenberg, and I'm very glad to be here at the Manning School of Business for these Manning Industry Days. Today I want to present to you what I call profiles in startup grit. To begin, I believe the important questions we must ask about grit are: what do we mean by grit? Where do the traits that create grit come from? How do entrepreneurs apply these traits? And is there a theoretical framework to explain why these traits develop? I believe you will see that entrepreneurs like you can apply the framework I've developed to your own challenges. So, what do we mean by grit? Angela Duckworth wrote the book titled Grit and has a lot to say on the subject. Grit is the ability to keep working towards a goal, even when faced with obstacles. It is a personality trait that involves passion, perseverance, and determination. Duckworth emphasized that grit is a better predictor of achievement than intellectual talent because grit provides the stamina required to stay the course amid challenges and setbacks. Where does grit come from? Grit seems to naturally come out of the response to adversity. The characteristics of grit are perseverance, continuing to work hard even when faced with difficulty or failure, passion, having a strong interest in and commitment to a goal, self-regulation, being able to postpone the need for positive reinforcement while working on a task. Research on post-traumatic growth suggests that some individuals can experience positive psychological changes following challenging life events. As we proceed through this discussion of grit, I ask that you reflect on which of these characteristics of grit you possess. It is common parlance to say that it takes grit to start and lead startups. That's because it takes grit to dive in, tackling fear, being willing to fail, perseverance, to pivot many times when your approach is not working, adaptability, and more than anything, to focus, work hard, and tirelessly fight to get your company to succeed and grow, passion. I have a lot of experience with startups, as well as quite a grit story for you of my own. Over my 35-year entrepreneurial career, I have founded 9 startups. I had 2 exits over 100 million. I'm still working on number 9, but the other 6 were not successes. I leveraged the grit I developed as a teenager to keep at it, to try a new angle, and to fight for what I needed to keep things going. My framework defines what I think gives a person grit. I presented it in my 2016 TEDx talk called Who Says I Can't? Let's look at that framework now. My theory is that a triple package of traits leads to the success of the physically disabled, but also any entrepreneur facing challenges. This triple package is insecurity combined with exceptionalism and with discipline, which leads to success. We're going to examine each of these 3 traits in both a life and business context. The traits apply equally to both aspects of our lives. In life, insecurity comes from being knocked down in some way. It can make you fearful, but you have enough drive to want to feel better about yourself so that you don't wallow in self-pity and instead set goals that you focus on and work hard to achieve. From there, insecurity keeps you at it so you don't give up or backslide. In business, it's exactly the same, except the challenges are business instead of a physical or mental challenge. Insecurity keeps you from having hubris or being arrogant, dangerous traits that are to be avoided. This healthy doubt drives continuous improvement rather than complacency. In life, exceptionalism comes from a series of little victories when you have achieved the goals you've set. Each one builds on the previous ones and your confidence grows. That builds resilience so you can withstand the occasional disappointment or setback. In business, it's exactly the same. The goals are with your business instead of things like a sport or another high challenge activity. And the exceptionalism is less about you personally than about your team and your company and what they can achieve. In life, discipline is about focus and hard work to achieve those goals you've set. It means you are willing to work harder at what you want than anyone around you or even your prior self thought possible. You are applying this to personal achievements like winning that next tennis game or playing that next piece of difficult music. In business, it's exactly the same, except now discipline is about how your team and company all work together, aligned in achieving the same goals, working hard and with confidence towards a comprehensive goal, such as building that MVP or proving product market fit or getting a term sheet from a VC. None of these three traits by themselves is sufficient for us to thrive. Alone, insecurity can be crippling. By itself, exceptionalism is a recipe for arrogance. And in isolation, discipline may produce asceticism. Only in combination do these three traits lead us to success. The brave face of the exceptional entrepreneur hides behind it the self-doubts of the insecure, doubts kept in check only through discipline. This framework came out of my rallying cry, "Who says I can't?" There is a clear connection between this phrase and my framework for understanding grit. Who, that's me and everyone around me expressing doubts in my ability. That creates insecurity. Says I reflects emerging confidence. It's me by myself successfully facing this challenge which fosters exceptionalism. Can't expresses the attitude I am developing. Others may think I can't, but I know I can. I will prove it through discipline. Next up, I will show you my grit story and how I saw these three traits develop in me. My grit story was applied initially to my non-business life, but was key to my being able to build 9 startups. For consistency, I'm using podcast interviews of both me and the 4 stars of today's profiles in grit. You will see in this first segment how I got whacked with a disability as a teenager, absolutely destroying my self-esteem and infiltrating my still-forming 16-year-old personality with a strong and persistent sense of insecurity that persists to this day, 52 years later.
When I was 16, I was in high school in Michigan. It was October. We had a gym class that was focused on jumping rope. And I like jumping rope. Actually, a lot of fun. And I was in midair when my right knee bent. When I landed, it wasn't in the right position, and I crashed on it, and it was so excruciatingly painful. Everybody in the room knew something bad was going on, and they called my dad. My dad's a surgeon, and he said, "Oh, big guys hurt their knees all the time. I'll just put an ace bandage on it. Take it easy, and it'll be better." Except that it's almost impossible when you tell a 16-year-old to take it easy for them to follow that advice. And then finally in December, I was walking the dog and it had snowed and then it had rained. And so it was slick as could be. And I fell, and that was the last time I walked. Somehow got back to the house and just laid on the horn. And my parents came out and said, "We're taking you to the hospital. We're going to get a biopsy." And so a couple hours later, we knew that it was a bone cancer that's really rare called osteosarcoma. It affects teenagers. And I had the leg amputated the next morning.
Everyone was hammering me with can't, which certainly added to my insecurity. But this is also when I realized that I must not listen to this and instead needed to figure out on my own what I would be able to do and how. I knew I needed to rebuild my self-esteem, and fast.
From then on, I was trying to figure out what I could do. I was very sports oriented. We skated. I did, neighborhood touch football and baseball, and we were a skiing family. And all of these things, I was asking people, am I going to be able to do this? And everybody said, no, you can't. No, you can't. I was hearing can't constantly. This was very demoralizing because I already had to figure out just how to even stand up and balance. It was just this wave of negativity coming at me. None of my friends visited me in the hospital. I had one friend from a previous school that visited me. That's the only one. So when I got back to school, it was on crutches because now they know better. They fit you with a prosthesis right away. It helps the healing, but they didn't do that then. And as I'm walking down the hall, it was between classes. It was packed with kids. But they were jumping out of my way over each other like I was parting the waters of the Red Sea. What I did figure out pretty quickly was that there were things I could start to do that helped me feel better about myself, because your self-esteem is at an all-time low.
I use sports to discover the power of exceptionalism. You might think it odd for someone to feel simultaneously insecure and exceptional, yet it is precisely this unstable combination that generates drive.
To start going further and further and further on crutches. I took on the job of walking our golden retriever after school every day. We go to Maine in the summers, and they have some big hills, mountains on this one island we were on. I would climb these things on crutches. I would get blisters on my hand, but it was this thing started to happen where I discovered that if I just focused and worked hard at something, even something that seemed as simple as crutch walking, that I could actually do better at it than anyone ever anticipated. And that was the most encouraging thing. Surgery was in January. And then in March, before the season was over, I insisted my parents take me to our little local ski hill. They were a little nervous about it. I had the standard pointy poles, which aren't very helpful because you can't lean on them. If you're moving. In skiing, we say that you steer with your big toe. So basically what would happen is I would make a nice turn to the right. And as soon as I tried to turn the other way, I'd fall. And again, and again, and again. My parents were so worried that I was humiliated by this experience. But in fact, at the end of the day, I said, wow, I'm so excited. They said, what do you mean? I said, I will be able to do this. I just have to work really hard at it. I can figure this out. They were like, oh, wow, this is a weird kid.
And here's 23 seconds on how skiing worked out for me several years later. Osteosarcoma is an aggressive cancer, and it was in my bloodstream for all this time because 3 years later, it showed up in my lung and I had to have most of my left lung removed. My doctor told me no one had ever survived when this happened. He put me on just-released chemotherapy in case it had a chance of working. After the year of chemo, I dropped out of college and left for Utah to be a ski bum, where I intended to ski until I dropped dead. I got pretty good by skiing 100 days straight, focused on perfecting one-legged skiing. But in April, the snow melted and I wasn't dead. So I finished college, got a PhD, an appointment as a professor, and then decided to do my first startup in 1988. All things people kept telling me most people can't do, as in, you can't. My framework applies to everyone, not just someone facing the challenges I did. As we next go through the 4 individuals, look for similar perspectives you and our subjects have relative to grit. Our 4 profiles in Startup Grit are with Kelly Bruno, Jules Pieri, Morgan Templar, and Dmitry Denchev. Kelly Bruno is a board-certified physician in anesthesiology and pain medicine. Born without a right leg, she turned early adversity into extraordinary achievement through pure determination. From being told she'd never swim to completing 100-mile ultramarathons. Combining her interest in medicine and sports, she co-founded a training company called Complete Human Performance and is now pivoting to longevity and performance medicine with a new startup. Early on, Kelly dealt with staring and teasing from middle school kids that exacerbated her latent insecurity from not having that leg. Here's Kelly.
You're like the queen of grit, in my opinion. You were born without a complete leg. When did that really start to affect the way you thought about yourself?
I mean, even at a young age, I knew 4 or 5 years old, but it wasn't really until I would say middle school when I started to really notice and not acknowledge the difference.
Did kids make fun of you? Did kids tease you? Was it traumatic?
It's very traumatic. It's something that I've, looked back on, and it was definitely just had a huge impact on, I think, the direction that my life moved in, and also the person I became. I think even more so than people making fun of me or teasing me, it was the internal conversation I had. It was people staring at me and then me wondering what they were thinking, feeling deformed or feeling, different. And so it almost didn't matter if they were making fun of me verbally or outwardly. It was the internal dialogue I had with myself that I was different, that I kind of assumed everyone was laughing at me or uncomfortable around it. And I would say I don't have memories of kids outwardly making fun of me. I know that I have no doubt that there were conversations. I was in 7th grade, but I also had a strong support system. And so luckily I just kind of was shielded some.
Kelly's story powerfully illustrates how insecurity, when channeled constructively, becomes a catalyst rather than an obstacle. Kelly had strong internal motivation to counteract her insecurity using discipline because, as she puts it, I wanted to be more, I wanted to be as capable.
Something in you made you fight back in a very positive way. I'll show them.
I mean, I don't know if it was as much for them as for me. It was it was almost like, I'll show me. I think it was very internally motivated that I had something to prove to them, but to myself almost more. I wanted to be more. I wanted to be as capable. And so there was, again, this almost internal motivator of, I need to do these things. I can do these things. I am not less. And so rather than get pulled down by that depression or discouragement of not being able to use my leg or walk or do these things, I was essentially finding ways to be more active and luckily had outlets for that. And again, have always been driven by that personal motivator, that internal voice. I think the world in a way would have been like, go sit on the sideline. You deserve it. It's okay. And I wouldn't take that.
Just like me, she was told, you can't swim. And just like me, it motivated her and gave her drive that she continues to exhibit. She has set numerous records in triathlons where the first event is, guess what? Swimming.
Yeah, and I remember back when I was very little, I was put in a swim class, and the swim instructor, I think, had no experience with someone with a disability or a limb loss deficiency. And so he told my mom, she will never swim. They put me in the water and I would, swim in a circle basically because I couldn't, kick with both legs. And I can't fault him. He didn't know what he was doing. But I remember later kind of learning this and being like, that's not true. Like, and of course I doubled down, right? I'm going to prove this guy wrong. I'm going to learn how to swim. And many years later, I was doing Ironmans and then I swam just fine. Each time there was I accomplished something or I completed something, there was a little bit of that. I can do more than this. So I did a triathlon. My first triathlon was sprint triathlon and then did Olympic distance and I worked my way up to Ironman. At that point, I was like, well, I've done a marathon, so I guess I can do a marathon. So then I went in and I started running more road running. At that point, that's always been my passion, always been my love from a physical endeavor. Part of it was being motivated by other people, what they were doing. And I'm like, oh, if they can do it, I should try it. I can do it. So I would see what other people were doing. I had some friends that were getting into ultra marathons at the time. When I asked to sign up for a race, they said, well, you want to do the 50 or the 100 and a miler. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this training, and I'm going to have this race ahead of me, like go big or go home. And so that's kind of been that mindset of why not go all in and shoot for the 100? That would be a major accomplishment.
Here's a 9-second clip showing Kelly doing all 3 sports in a triathlon we constructed for a video series on YouTube called Who Says I Can't? It was insecurity that initially drove her to not settle for being average, but Kelly epitomizes exceptionalism the way she took each thing she tried, swimming, biking, running, and built each success into a bigger and bigger goal. She knows a lot about lost limbs and about pain, so she saw how she could create a company that improves the lives of people in pain.
I never held myself to the standard of kind of average, I guess. I always wanted to be above that. And I think a lot of that was driven by this need and desire to prove myself, to show everyone else that I was equal. I think a lot of that was also learned, though, when I was able to kind of prove to myself and to others that I was capable of doing these things. I was able to finish these events. I was good at them. It did give me the confidence to then go after other types of goals. So not just physical ones, career goals, professional goals, those kinds of experiences. I don't think that I have been deterred by things that seem challenging. When I started working with Wounded Warrior Project and Soldier Ride, I had a friend who He was an ex-Army Ranger. He had started a company. He said, "Hey, Kelly, I'm meeting a lot of these guys coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. They've lost limbs. Are you able to come and just talk to them and answer questions and help them see that their life's not over?" And that was the point where I said, I can do more. I knew at that point, so a lot of people can go from anesthesiology to pain medicine, and that was really a passion of mine. Pain medicine is a totally different field. There's no organ system that creates pain. Pain is actually the end result, and that's what we're trying to treat, and we don't know where it's coming from. No, and a lot of the people that I worked with, these wounded warrior, wounded vets that came out, they had a lot of phantom limb pain, a lot of residual limb pain, and it just wasn't being treated well. And so I did a year fellowship at the university. I think that our conventional treatments are limited, and we need to start taking a different approach, because unfortunately the trajectory of kind of our societal norm is not on a healthy path. And being someone who is so active, who is kind of all about health and wellness, it's kind of frustrating to be in a system that's all about sick care and not health care. So looking at health span and improving health span, I've looked at really kind of translating that and what I learned there into starting a company, a kind of virtual remote clinic that helps people implement these lifestyle and longevity type treatments that will help in the long run.
Kelly says she expects to get this new HealthSpan startup going this year. Jules Pieri's journey from the wrong side of the tracks to achieving a series of firsts demonstrates the grit she came by naturally from her early life experiences. She grew up not taking things for granted, knowing she had to work for them, but others did not have that same discipline. So she knew that she had an advantage over her peers and could and would be successful. Her entrepreneurial success with the Grommet shows how she applied this same determination to solving market problems. After she sold the Grommet, she joined an all-woman VC firm called X Factor, which provides pre-seed and seed stage capital for companies founded by women. Jules had some built-in insecurity from her formative years in one of Detroit's auto factory neighborhoods.
Well, I guess I'm from the wrong side of the tracks in Detroit, literally the city. And my dad was an auto worker, and we lived literally next to some freight train railroad tracks in a Detroit diesel Allison plant. So I grew up in a very industrial setting, and now I live in the oldest neighborhood in Boston. It's called Charlestown.
But family values and the nature of her life built up in her a strong sense of discipline and hard work, as this next story about the private school Cranbrook shows. This experience teaches her an important lesson about how her willingness to work harder than others applies to her business career.
I never left Detroit, never been on a plane, and I show up as a boarder because there was no way for me to get there every day. And I realized as the classes started, like, I didn't have the preparation. It's a rigorous place. Like, if I started Algebra 2, because I'd had Algebra 1 in Detroit, I'd realize, oh my God, you didn't really have Algebra 1. So for the first 2 weeks, I was really nauseous. Like, I've got investors. I had a scholarship. Like, I've got to get a B to stay here and everything. So I started working my little fingers off. But then 2 weeks into it, something happened that helped. Our English teacher asked who did the summer reading. It was really hard. Shakespeare, Chaucer. It was painful. I was the only person who raised my hand. And I was stunned at two things. I was stunned that the kids in the room were confident enough to admit that. They didn't have to worry about not being able to come back the next year, I suppose. But I was more stunned that they hadn't done it. I just thought, who doesn't do the work? But that was a really pivotal moment that I realized, oh, you know how to work. You've grown up in an environment where nobody gave you anything other than health and good parents. But I did have the experience of having to earn. I'd started working when I was 12 with paid outside job. I think that was when I started becoming an entrepreneur as that scared high school student.
Jules's realization that she could outwork her peers became the foundation of her exceptionalism, which she applied to business challenges. What we see in Jules's path in business is that her innate smarts and her learning how following the rules and using her discipline to overachieve meant she did well. She began to feel the self-confidence resulting from her exceptionalism, which, after a chance conversation in a VC's office, set her on the path to create a truly original and innovative startup called the Grommet. It took all the grit she could muster to keep it going through very tough times. She eventually sold it to Ace Hardware.
My career's been a lot around product development. I started out as an industrial designer. So that's key to what I'm about to tell you in terms of forming the Grommet. At the time I started the company, I had just left a role as president of a social network. I was networking for my next role and imagining working in a startup. So I went to talk to a venture capitalist friend. I was sitting in the lobby and I was explaining to somebody else that there was this really big problem with how there was going to be an explosion of great new products in the market because of technology, because of the internet, 3D printing, the ability to credibly create a prototype or to credibly do market research. The sources of new products would be unexpected young companies. Yet in my career, I'd observed how retail was increasingly consolidating. So we were losing all the specialty stores and the mom and pop stores that take chances on new product. And I said, that's going to be a really uncomfortable collision, really great new products, more of them than ever, and they're going to be all dressed up with no place to go. And they won't be sophisticated enough to manage marketing on the internet. Somebody's got to help these people. And the guy across from me, I've never seen him since, said, you should do that. I went home that night and thought, that could be a business, like a product launch platform. Somebody who curates and creates trust and an exciting way to discover new products, which is what we built. I think every company is going to have some near fatal blows or really strong threats. And quite often they could be competitive threats. They could be something internal that the early employees, something goes wrong and that can be fatal to a company. It could be, misread of the market and you've put a lot of effort into the wrong thing. We had minor versions of all those things. One was the company was super undercapitalized and it was a company that needed capital. It wasn't a bootstrap forever type of company, because if you're really going to help Swell gain awareness for their water bottles, you need to be a relatively large community that's trusted and known, that takes capital. And it takes capital to find these products and tell beautiful stories about them. We launched just as Lehman Brothers collapsed. The news cycle that 24 hours had just killed everybody's spirits. And so the doors to capital really closed. I think every company should have 1 or 2 years of extreme starvation and really proving you mean it. So I expected 1 or 2 years like that and knew how to operate in a lean environment. But we had 4 years that were really extreme. And near death 3 times, the type of near death where you have to tell your employees, I don't know if I can pay you. I thought I kind of shielded it from my kids. The third one, I thought, I've got to tell them. I just don't know if I can pull this one out. Kind of was slumped on the kitchen counter, and my youngest son, Carl, asked me what was wrong. And I said, I just don't know if we're going to make it. He gave me a Newt Rockney, like, you can do it, Mom, speech. We had no idea what he was saying, but it was so motivating to me. More than if an investor or somebody else had said it. And then we managed to secure a strategic investment from a large company in Tokyo.
To truly succeed at something worthwhile requires laser beam focus, and to conquer anything challenging requires hard work. For entrepreneurs facing rejection or recession, this discipline becomes the backbone of eventual success, as it has been for Jules. Morgan Templar is the founder of First CDO Partners. Her career is quite the journey from starting as a secretary to becoming a successful entrepreneur. First CDO Partners is focused on data governance and provides chief data officers to organizations who are too small to have a full-time CDO, but rely on proper handling of data critical to the functioning of their company. She has had extreme personal challenges with her daughter's and her husband's health, but despite these difficulties, Morgan's grit has propelled her career and led to the founding of her own startup. Morgan got an early start at being independent and totally self-reliant while creating a yummy concoction.
I was 3, climbing up on the counters and getting down cornflakes and a piece of bread. And I would make ketchup and cornflake sandwiches because it's what I could find. We didn't have any money. We didn't have anything. And that's what I would make. And so I would have to feed myself. And I body trained myself because my dad was very depressed and in a lot of pain. So from earliest years of my life, I've been independent.
Her grit began at age 3, and through her career and the incredible things her personal life threw at her, it just kept getting stronger and stronger. In spite of the adversity Morgan has experienced, her grit traits of insecurity, exceptionalism, and discipline have given her the strength to just do whatever is necessary.
Okay, I'm elder. What does that really mean? Not exactly sure, but we're bootstrapping and we're making it. So we're going to make it. I think the biggest reason that I feel that way is that I came up through the business. I've been mostly the last 24 years, I've spent 20 of them in healthcare. And I started as a secretary in the security department of a hospital. And I went from there to an administrative assistant to one of the C-suite. And I went from there to I'm a credentialing specialist, and I was an individual contributor about data. And then I was hunted away to become a manager. And then I worked my way up to director. And along the way, I became a business solution architect. So I've really been through, all the way up into the role of vice president of information management and data management, which is essentially the CDO. I've worked my way up. I understand the entire ecosystem from what it affects the entry frontline employees to what affects the executives and the bottom line with the board. And because I've had that experience of being able to work my way up, I really do feel like that's something most people don't get. Most people either start halfway and move up, or they make it to halfway. There are some very significant glass ceilings that I've had to break through to be able to get to where I got. I think now as a founder, I recognize that, and I try to help chief data officers or that new director who's the head of governance actually get through that to an executive point of view and being able to work with executives and make data a first-class citizen in your organization.
Morgan had way more serious family health crises than any one person should have to weather. The resilience she had to have to handle this came to her naturally from her self-reliance, beginning at age 3.
My daughter, who was 13, woke up dying. Her hands were cramped up. She was completely gray. They rushed her to the hospital. She had no blood in her system, 0. They said they'd seen dead people with more blood than her, and she wasn't dead yet.
Where did her blood go?
No one knows. She had a one-of-a-kind blood disorder that nobody's ever had, something about the 7th chromosome being inverted. She would make baby blood cells, and then they would disappear. And she was actually transfusion dependent. Every 3 to 4 days, she'd get a blood transfusion for a year. Finally, she had a bone marrow transplant. Her younger sister was her donor. That cured it. Unfortunately, it's not a particularly happy story because she took her own life 2 years ago. So the day that she was in the hospital, my husband felt his left ear go ring and then pop, but he couldn't hear out of it anymore. But he didn't tell me. He wanted to focus on our daughter and make sure that she was okay. Did an MRI, and he had a tumor. It was actually a tumor on the facial nerve. What they thought was a 1 centimeter tumor was 4 centimeters. So I'm still taking my daughter every 4 days to get a bone marrow transplant. We're trying to make life as normal as possible for the other 3 kids. We didn't go to cheerleading and football and soccer anymore. We went to the doctor, and you have to get this out within, you maybe have 3 or 4 months, period. He was pushing on his brain stem, which meant his heart and lungs were failing him. He would just pass out. He woke up from surgery with no balance nerve. He couldn't walk. He couldn't shower. He couldn't eat. I had to help him with everything. And that lasted about 3 years. I wouldn't let him be alone in the shower because he would fall. And then I personally had to have a hysterectomy 3 months after his surgery and 2 months before our daughter's bone marrow transplant. From October to March, all 3 of us had a pretty serious procedure, and I worked full time. I mean, I would sleep at the hospital and shower in the CEO's private shower because I was there with my husband in one hospital, my daughter in the other, having to go back and forth and still do my job.
Morgan's ability to maintain discipline through multiple family crises directly translates to her entrepreneurial resilience. Like my experience learning to ski, Morgan's story demonstrates how discipline becomes instinctual when facing repeated challenges. This is Dmitry Dinchev. Dmitry has a fascinating life journey from growing up in Bulgaria and Nigeria to playing basketball in the United States and eventually founding his startup, Galena Hill. It is his adaptability that has directly led to his success. He is constantly innovating and adapting his solution to differentiate his offering as he searches for product market fit. Dimitri's background of coming from a failing communist country and living in rural Nigeria set him up with the drive to succeed and get everything he could out of each opportunity, from basketball to his career and now his startup.
I was born in Bulgaria, and I was born there in the early 70s when Bulgaria was still very much under the curtain. It was behind the Iron Curtain. First 7 years, I pretty much grew up there in a very, very old school type of environment. We had a big family. We had harvesting done in the fall. I mean, we prepared food for the winter. We played out on the streets. We played in the yard. So it was just a very different environment from what you might find in many of the cities today. And at one point in time, my parents decided to venture out to Africa, and that's where my adventures began. We went from basically socialist Bulgaria to rural Nigeria. So you can imagine what the the contrast was. You know, it was a completely different country, completely different geography, completely different culture. And then from there, eventually, my parents sent me back off home. They wanted me to educate myself in Bulgaria as opposed to in Nigeria. I became an athlete. That took me all over Europe. From there, my parents gradually moved from Nigeria to Botswana to South Africa. And at one stage, after my military service in Bulgaria, I decided to go join them. So that's how I got to South Africa. And in South Africa, I got completely on a whim recruited by two incredible gentlemen to play basketball in the United States. We had a huge tournament down there, and somehow they managed to see me play. And 3 months later, I got a phone call, and I got a full ride to Wisconsin, Milwaukee. So I actually came to America on a completely just random path. And
So, Dimitri, are you pretty tall?
I'm pretty tall. I'm 6'6".
Dimitri had multiple career transitions, but each one in some key way built on the previous one, and just like constantly improving at basketball, he was developing the exceptionalism that, when the opportunity to found a startup appeared, he had the confidence to jump at.
I went from training as a mutual fund trader for a Wall Street firm after my graduate studies to finding a job as an operations manager for a car rental franchise, becoming a partner of one through the franchise system, moving to Reno. Basically, we exited that business, sold it. It was very successful. From there, figuring out what else I can do in Reno. I had an amateur racing company set up at one point. I did a lot of track tours, so to speak. But eventually went back into construction and manufacturing as the CFO of a modular construction building plant right here in Minden, Nevada. So spent some time there. And from there, lots of the work that I've done, which was mostly profit modeling, lots of Excels, lots of data analysis, decided to turn that into a product. And that sent me on this completely different journey. If I only knew how hard that would be. So from a mutual fund trader, basically to a franchise car rental manager, owner operator, to a CFO of a manufacturing plant, to a software startup founder.
It's Galena Hill.
Galena Hill, yes. Galena Hill is the company.
Dimitri used the pain points he experienced as a business owner to drive him to forming Galena Hill. He saw the market need and had the core knowledge and experience, as well as the confidence to know he could solve it with the right team and the right product.
Well, there's a story behind that too, because when I did this, and at the time my software skills were limited to SQL database analysis and design, ability to export data into Excel program macros. So those are my abilities at the time. And at one stage we had on the side built a forecasting system for a friend of mine who had a different startup, and he was so happy with it that he says, I'm going to take you to an investor, and I want you to show him this. I called it Frankenstein because it had so many moving parts. It was scary. So we took Frankenstein to a venture capital broker right here in town, and in there I met this very interesting individual. So he kind of took our pitch in, listened to what we had, and said, Dimitri, let me just give you a few pointers here. I mean, this Excel that you've built, as powerful and as useful it can be to one person or to one business owner, is something that you're going to struggle with placing into a niche. Small business owners are not that sophisticated, so they're going to struggle with managing this thing in the first place. Larger business owners or corporations have a team of IT professionals and analysts that are already in place with tools that are already in place. So you're going to have to convince a committee of 20 people as to why they need to adopt your product and your solution, or in some ways maybe abandon a capital investment into some other infrastructure that they've done and go with what you have. So if you really want to standardize this product offering, it would have to be a piece of software. It would most likely have to be something that runs online or runs in the cloud, and it would have to be integrated with a major accounting system such as Intuit. So after that meeting is really when I got scared about this whole thing, and I kind of started grasping the amount of work that was going to have to go in it. And you know what? I sat here, we talked with my wife, and I quit my job and I said, you know what? We're just going to go ahead and build this. We're going to create an accounting intelligence system that integrates with Intuit QuickBooks, and for certain industries is also able to output predictive analytics in a way that a business owner can have financial clarity, can have a much more forward-looking vision. So that's really where we embarked, and probably a really long answer to your question, what was the market niche? And at the time, our thesis was that the market niche was the small to mid-size business owner who has a QuickBooks accounting management system.
The adaptability Dimitri developed in his early life has stood him in good stead in business, as he has had to adapt, adjust, and pivot constantly as he inches closer and closer to product market fit.
We have a premise that all these business owners are going to like it, or CPAs are going to like it, because we also tried that. We did not exactly discover product market fit. At that point, blockchains, NFTs were just emerging, the CryptoKitties, and these crypto exchanges were not even in place yet. Bitcoin was a phenomenon. So we decided to look into the distributed ledger as a non-financial tool and see how we can use that, legitimize the diligence process such that certain amounts of data, financial statements, files, etc., can be transformed into digital originals and secured. If you're transmitting information business to business, there is a 100% guarantee that what you're transmitting is forever immutable, and the information it's encrypted, safe, and secure, and incorruptible. That sent us to MVP number 2, which was essentially a encrypted data transmission system with a blockchain notary system attached to it. Now, since then, we're looking for the product market fit of that. The closest we've come is a prototype grade solution that we built for the city of Reno, which they're very happy with. And now we're looking to extend that technology into just document management across the state of Nevada. I believe we're knocking on the door of product market fit, and, you know, starting from accounting intelligence and going all the way into document management for government.
Dimitri's story shows us how adaptability strengthens and interweaves all 3 elements of grit, creating a particularly resilient foundation for entrepreneurship. Adaptability might be considered the master skill that amplifies all 3 core traits of grit: the ability to temper insecurities, to reframe what makes you exceptional, and to redirect discipline toward new goals. Next, let's apply this framework to your own entrepreneurial journey. Take 30 seconds right now to jot down one source of insecurity you can channel productively, one area where you've demonstrated exceptional ability, and one aspect of your work that requires more discipline. Remember these 3 traits. Insecurity cultivates healthy humility. Exceptionalism builds momentum through small wins. And discipline drives one to maintain consistent, focused effort. And overarching all of that is adaptability, the need to be flexible, to be able to pivot, and to meet the needs of the market. My mantra for 52 years has been, "Who says I can't?" It's a statement, not a question. It embodies these 3 traits that I believe are so critical to success. Yes, for someone with a significant physical challenge like me, but fundamentally for startup founders as well. The next time someone tells you your startup idea won't work, remember these stories and tell yourself, "Who says I can't?" Thank you.